The red and blue lights strobing off the wet pavement at 2 in the morning weren't signaling a routine traffic stop. They were the spark that would burn the Fairview Police Department to its foundations. At midnight, a decorated patrolman thought he was asserting his dominance on a dark, empty highway. By dawn, his badge would be lying on the commander's desk and his career would be ash. Sometimes the person you decide has no power turns out to be holding the keys to the entire city. If a story about quiet courage meeting ruthless corruption is the kind of thing you stay up for, subscribe now, because this one earns every minute. The rain had been falling in a steady, icy sheet over Fairview, Ohio for the better part of 6 hours. Maya James kept her hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel of her 5-year-old Honda Civic. She was 24, in her second year at Georgetown Law Home for the Thanksgiving holiday, and exhausted, having just left a long study session at a 24-hour diner with her old high school debate partner. The dashboard clock glowed a pale green, 2:14 a.m. The streets of the South Side District were deserted. The rhythmic thump of her wipers was the only sound keeping her company until the blinding glare of LED headlights flooded her rearview mirror. Maya checked her speedometer, 34 and a 35. She hadn't swerved. Her taillights worked. She'd signaled every lane change, yet the cruiser tailgated her for 4 agonizing blocks close enough that she could make out the push bar on its grill. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, a feeling she had been taught to manage since she was 16. A survival instinct drilled into her by a man who knew these streets better than anyone alive. The light bar erupted in red and blue. Maya let out a slow, controlled breath. She signaled, pulled smoothly into the lot of a shuttered laundromat, and put the car in park. She killed the engine, switched on the interior dome light, rolled down her window, and laid both hands flat on top of the wheel. She didn't reach for her purse. She didn't touch the glove box. She sat perfectly still. In the mirror, she watched the driver's door of the patrol car swing open. Officer Bernard Perry stepped out into the freezing rain. Perry was a 10-year veteran of the Fairview PD, a man who had built his reputation on aggressive collars and a staggering number of petty traffic citations in minority neighborhoods. Broad-shouldered, tight buzz cut, a permanent scowl that said the world owed him a debt it kept refusing to pay. In the passenger seat sat Officer Greg Harrison, a rookie barely 6 months out of the academy, watching through the rain-streaked windshield. Perry took his time. Unhooked the heavy flashlight from his belt and tapped it against his thigh as he walked. When he reached her window, he didn't lean in. He shined the beam straight into her eyes. License, registration, proof of insurance. His voice was a flat, authoritative bark, no courtesy in it. Maya turned her head slightly out of the center of the glare. "Good evening, officer. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. My registration's in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now. Is that all right?" Perry scoffed a short, ugly sound and lowered the light an inch. "Just get the documents. No sudden movements." She moved deliberately, retrieved her wallet, drew out her license, then leaned over and popped the glove box for the rest. Perry snatched the cards, deliberately scraping her knuckles with a rough, calloused hand. He studied the plastic far longer than he needed to jaw, working a piece of gum. "Maya James," he read, drawing the syllables out like they tasted bitter. "You're a long way from home, Maya. What are you doing driving around this neighborhood at 2 in the morning?" "I was at a diner studying. I'm on my way home to the north side." Her voice was steady, even polite. She knew the law. She knew her rights. And more importantly, she knew the fragile ego of the man outside her window. "Studying." A smirk. "Right. The diner. You sure you weren't picking something up? Southside's a known drug corridor. You look nervous, Maya. Your eyes are bloodshot." "I've been reading textbooks for 6 hours, officer. I'm completely sober. Could you tell me why I was pulled over?" His eyes narrowed. She wasn't stammering. She wasn't getting rattled, and that irritated him. He was used to fear. He fed on it. "You swerved over the yellow line back on 4th and Elm. Failure to maintain a lane. That's my probable cause. Now step out of the vehicle." Maya went still. She knew exactly where 4th and Elm was. It was a one-way street. There was no yellow line. "Officer, I think you may be mistaken. 4th is a one-way road. I haven't swerved." "Are you calling me a liar, girl?" Perry snapped his hand, dropping heavily to the butt of his sidearm. It was an intimidation tactic, plain and simple. "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but the training and her father's endless coaching took over. "Officer, I'm complying with your orders. I'm stepping out." She opened the door slowly and stepped into the freezing rain. The cold bit straight through her thin college sweatshirt. Perry grabbed her left arm, his grip needlessly brutal, and spun her around to press her chest against the cold, wet metal of the car roof. "Spread your legs." "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my person or my vehicle," Maya stated loud and clear, loud enough for the dash cam in his cruiser to pick up. "I am not a threat and I am unarmed. I decide who's a threat." His breath, stale with coffee and tobacco, hit her neck. He kicked her ankles apart, made her stumble, and patted down her sides, his hands lingering a second too long near her hips. Finding nothing, he clicked his tongue in frustration. "Smart mouth on you. Law student, huh? Think you know the streets better than I do." "I know the Fourth Amendment," Maya said, cheek pressed to the wet roof. That was the tipping point. The fragile glass of Perry's ego shattered. He unclipped his handcuffs. "You're under arrest." He wrenched her wrists behind her back and the cuffs ratcheted tight, biting into her skin. "On what charge?" she demanded, the first real edge of anger bleeding into her voice. "Resisting arrest, failure to comply, and disorderly conduct," Perry said, dripping with triumph. "Let's see how much that smart mouth helps you in holding." The ride to the 4th Precinct was suffocating. Maya sat wedged into the hard plastic back seat shoulders, aching from the tight cuffs, the rain smearing the neon of the city into streaks. Up front, Perry was performing for his rookie. "See, Harrison, this is what you watch out for, these entitled types. They read a book, watch some TV, and think they can tell us how to do our jobs. Give them an inch, they take a mile. You establish dominance early." Harrison, pale and deeply uncomfortable in the glow of the dashboard computer, offered a non-committal grunt. He had seen the stop. He knew she hadn't swerved. He knew the arrest was garbage. But Perry was his training officer, a man who could make or break his probation with a single stroke of a pen. So Harrison stared out the window and chose silence over integrity. Maya stayed silent too. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She cataloged everything: the time of the stop, the badge number she'd memorized off his chest, 4492, the exact wording of every threat. Any reaction would only be used to prop up his fabricated disorderly conduct charge, and she wasn't going to give him one. The cruiser rolled into the sally port. The concrete walls swallowed it as the steel doors ground shut behind them. Perry dragged her out by the bicep and marched her through the double doors into booking. The place smelled of floor wax, stale sweat, and cheap coffee. It was 3:10 a.m., the dead center of the graveyard shift. A couple of officers were slumped at desks typing reports with 2 fingers. Behind the elevated booking desk sat Sergeant Thomas Miller, a 20-year veteran counting down the days to his pension. A decent man worn smooth by the system who tended to look past the patrolman's rougher tactics just to keep peace in the house. "What do we have?" Miller asked, rubbing tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Got a live one, Sarge." Perry shoved Maya forward so she stumbled into the counter. "Maya James." Traffic stop turned into resisting and failure to comply. Suspect might be under the influence given the erratic behavior. Miller looked at her. He saw a young, impeccably dressed black woman, soaking wet, shivering with terrified but defiant eyes. He looked at the report Perry slapped down. "Any contraband on her person?" "No," Perry admitted, jaw tightening, but she was combative, verbally hostile. Miller sighed. He hated these collars. Contempt of cop. It meant paperwork, and it rarely survived a judge. But he wasn't going to undercut a senior officer in front of the room. "All right, empty her pockets, take her jewelry, put her in holding 3. As an older female officer came to process her belongings, Maya spoke. "I'm requesting my phone call, Sergeant." Perry laughed. "You'll get your call when we're good and ready, sweetie." "Actually," Miller cut in, mild but firm, checking Perry's ego just a fraction. "Booking protocol says she gets a call once she's processed." "Let her use the wall phone." Perry glared but backed off. Maya was uncuffed, her fingers numb and tingling. She crossed to the heavy metal phone bolted to the cinder block wall. She didn't need to look up the number. She'd known it by heart since she was 7. The phone rang twice. "Hello?" The voice was deep, gravelly with sleep, but instantly alert. "Dad." She kept her voice very low, her back to the booking desk where Perry was loudly bragging to another cop about how he'd handled it. "It's Maya." "Maya, it's 3 in the morning. Are you okay? Did you have an accident?" The concern in his voice was immediate. "I'm physically fine, but I've been arrested." There was a dead, heavy silence on the line for 3 long seconds. When the voice returned, the warmth of a worried father was gone, replaced by the cold, precise tone of a seasoned commander. Where are you? 4th Precinct, South Side. What are the charges? Traffic violation, resisting, failure to comply. It's a bad stop, Dad. Completely fabricated. The officer's name is Perry. Another pause. Perry, I know him. A beat. Did he hurt you, Maya? Just the cuffs. They're tight. I didn't say anything, Dad. I didn't drop your name. I just let him do it. Good girl. The voice was soft but vibrating with an intensity that would have frightened anyone who knew the man behind it. You did exactly right. Don't speak to anyone. Don't answer any questions. I'm leaving the house now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Okay, Dad. Maya hung up and turned around. Perry was leaning against the counter, a smug grin plastered across his face. Who'd you call Mommy? Your little lawyer boyfriend, he mocked. Tell him to bring bail money. You're going to be in that cage a while. Maya looked at Officer Bernard Perry, at his arrogant stance, the mud on his boots, the badge pinned to his chest. And she felt something close to pity, not out of kindness, but out of the absolute certainty of what was coming for him. Just a family member, she said quietly as the female officer walked her toward the iron bars of holding cell 3. The heavy door clanged shut, the lock echoing through the damp room. She sat down on the metal bench, crossed her legs, and waited for the storm to arrive. In the quiet of the cell, she ran the whole stop back through her mind one more time, the way her father had taught her, fixing each detail in place before adrenaline could blur it. The 4 blocks he'd tailed her, the lie about 4th and Elm, the exact moment his hand had found his sidearm, and the exact words that followed. She would need all of it clean and precise, and not one word of it exaggerated. Down the corridor, she could still hear Perry's voice, loud and pleased with itself, retelling the arrest to anyone who'd listen. Hunt had no idea he was narrating the last easy hour of his career. She almost pitied him. Almost. Dimitar James did not panic. Panic was a luxury for people who didn't know how to dismantle a bomb, and Dimitar had spent his entire adult life dismantling them. He rose from his bed in the quiet house in the affluent North Side suburbs. He didn't wake his wife. She was getting over a mild flu, and there was no reason to add to it. He walked into his closet and dressed methodically, bypassing the tailored suits and the crisp, decorated uniform. Tonight was not for the press. Tonight was personal. He pulled on a dark gray turtleneck, a heavy black wool coat, leather gloves. At the safe in his study, he retrieved his off-duty piece, a compact Glock 19, and slid it into a shoulder holster. He didn't clip on his badge case. He slipped the gold shield straight into his coat pocket. Dimitar James was the chief of police of Fairview, the first black man to hold the position in the city's 150-year history. He had earned it not through politics, but through 30 years of grinding, brilliant work, starting as a beat cop in the South Side, moving through homicide, commanding narcotics, and finally clearing out the corruption in the upper brass to take the top chair. He was respected by the mayor, feared by the gangs, and revered by the good cops. And he knew the 4th Precinct. He knew its culture, a holdover from a bygone era, a boys' club where old-school cops treated the badge as a license for their own prejudices. He had been quietly transferring the worst of them out, tightening policy, demanding accountability. Clearly the message hadn't yet reached Officer Bernard Perry. He climbed into his personal vehicle, a jet-black unmarked Ford Expedition, and pulled out into the rain. No lights, no siren. He drove the speed limit, his mind moving with cold precision as he reviewed everything he knew about Perry. The excessive force complaints, the disciplinary hearings that had somehow ended in slaps on the wrist thanks to an aggressive union rep. The pattern of racially biased stops that Internal Affairs was already quietly building into a federal file. Perry had just handed the chief the last nail for his own coffin, and he'd used the chief's own daughter to do it. It took exactly 22 minutes to reach the visitor lot of the 4th Precinct. Inside, the 3:30 lull had fully settled in. Miller was reading a paperback behind the desk. Harrison sat at a corner desk, nervously writing and rewriting his incident report, trying to figure out how to make Perry's lies sound plausible on paper. Perry himself was in the break area next to Booking Boots, propped on a plastic table, eating a powdered donut and holding court with 2 other patrolmen. "I'm telling you," Perry laughed, powder dusting his chin. She tried the whole, "I know my rights, I'm in law school" routine. Shut that down real quick. Tossed her in the back. These kids need to learn respect. Sometimes you just have to put the fear of God in them, remind them who runs the streets. The heavy lobby doors hissed open. A gust of freezing, rain-soaked air swept through the room, fluttering the papers on the bulletin board. Footsteps echoed on the linoleum, slow, heavy, deliberate. Miller looked up from his book, annoyed by the draft, and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black coat walking toward the desk, his face in shadow, his posture rigidly straight. "Can I help you, sir?" Miller asked, with the bored authority of a desk sergeant handling a late-night civilian. "If you're here to post bail, you'll have to wait for the magistrate at 8. The man stopped in front of the elevated desk. He didn't look at Miller. His eyes, dark as obsidian, were locked on the break area on Bernard Perry, who was mid-bite. Perry paused, feeling the weight of the stare. He lowered the donut brow, furrowing. "Can I help you, buddy? Sergeant just told you bail's closed." The man in the coat reached slowly into his pocket. Miller tensed his hand, dropping instinctively toward his holster. But the man didn't pull a weapon. He pulled a heavy, solid gold badge. He didn't flash it. He set it down on the wooden counter with a heavy metallic clack. 4 stars. Miller's breath caught. The blood drained from his face so fast he went dizzy. He scrambled up his chair, rolling back and slamming into the wall. "10 hut!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Every officer in the room froze. Harrison dropped his pen. The 2 cops with Perry shot up so fast one spilled coffee down his trousers. Perry lowered his feet from the table, confusion warring with a sudden icy dread in his gut. He stood slowly, wiping sugar from his mouth. Chief Dimitar James finally looked at Miller. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the dead silent room. "Sergeant Miller, I want the arrest report, the dash cam footage, and the body cam footage for the suspect brought in at 3:10 a.m. now." Miller's hands shook as he fumbled with the paperwork. "Chief James?" "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Perry felt his knees go weak. James. The name detonated in his skull. He looked toward the holding cells, then back to the towering figure in the black coat. The young woman in cell 3, Maya James. "Chief," Perry stammered, stepping forward, every ounce of bravado gone, replaced by the scrambling tone of a cornered rat. "Chief, I can explain. It was a chaotic scene. The suspect was non-compliant." Dimitar turned his head. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at Perry, a look that had broken hardened men in interrogation rooms. "Officer Perry," the chief said, dropping another octave, "if you speak one more word in my presence before Internal Affairs arrives, I will personally put you through that plate glass window." Perry's mouth snapped shut, his face going ashen gray. The donut sat like lead in his stomach. "Sergeant," the chief said, not breaking eye contact with Perry, "unlock cell 3. Bring my daughter to me." Miller's hands shook so badly the brass ring of keys clattered like a dropped tambourine. He half-jogged to the holding corridor. The heavy deadbolt clunked like a cannon shot in the silence, and he swung the iron door of cell 3 wide. "Miss James," he said, his voice stripped of all its bureaucratic boredom. You're released. Please step out." Maya rose from the bench, smoothed the wrinkles from her damp Georgetown sweatshirt, kept her face neutral, and walked out. She didn't look at Miller. She walked straight through the corridor into the main booking area. When Dimitar saw his daughter, the icy exterior of the chief fractured for exactly 1 second. His shoulders dropped a fraction and a muscle in his jaw feathered as he took in the damp clothes and the angry red welts on her wrists where the cuffs had bitten in. He took 2 steps and folded her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. "I'm okay, Dad." She leaned in for a brief moment, then pulled back, aware of the tactical reality of the room. "I documented everything mentally. Timestamps, badge number, phrasing." "I know you did." Pride swelled in his chest, then hardened back into cold, calculating fury as he turned to the room. The chief of police was online again. "Sergeant Miller, I want the desk log secured. I want Officer Perry's and Officer Harrison's body cameras detached and handed to me right now. I want Patrol Unit 42 locked down in the Sally Port. Nobody touches the dashcam server." Perry felt cold sweat break across the back of his neck. He knew the protocol for a contested arrest. This wasn't protocol. This was an executive strike. And then, to his horror, his rookie moved. Greg Harrison unclipped the body camera from the center of his chest, walked straight up to the chief, and handed it over. "Sir, my camera. It was active during the whole interaction." "Harrison, what the hell are you doing?" Perry hissed, stepping forward. "That's Union property until a rep is present." Chief James turned his gaze on Perry. "Officer Perry, you are under investigation for false arrest, excessive force, and falsifying a police report. If you obstruct the collection of evidence, I will add tampering and insubordination, and I will have Sergeant Miller put you in the very cell you pulled my daughter out of. Detach the camera." Perry swallowed hard. The absolute certainty in the chief's voice paralyzed him. With trembling fingers, he unclipped his own camera and set it on the desk. "Now," James commanded, his voice ringing off the cinder block. "Get me Captain Richard Donovan from Internal Affairs on the phone. Wake him. Tell him to get a strike team down here immediately, and Sergeant confiscate Officer Perry's duty weapon and his badge. He is stripped of his police powers pending investigation." A collective gasp pulled the air out of the room. A summary suspension on the spot was almost unheard of. It bypassed the union, bypassed the precinct commander, and went straight to the nuclear option. "You can't do this," Perry protested, his voice cracking as panic finally drowned his ego. "I have rights. I want my PBA rep. I followed procedure." She was swerving. She was uncooperative. "Save it for IA, Bernard." A new voice. From the corner, Greg Harrison finally found his spine. The rookie who had spent 6 months silently enduring Perry's bravado stepped forward, pale but steady. "She wasn't swerving, Chief." "Shut your mouth, rookie!" Perry roared, lunging half a step before freezing under the chief's lethal glare. Harrison ignored his training officer. He glanced at Maya, offered a small nod of apology, and looked back at the chief. "We tailed her for 4 blocks. She was driving perfectly. Officer Perry said he wanted to, quote, see what this one was doing in our neighborhood. He fabricated the failure to maintain a lane on 4th and Elm. I knew 4th was a one-way and I didn't correct him. When she cited the law, he escalated. The arrest was retaliatory, sir, completely punitive." The silence that followed was absolute. Perry stared at his partner, mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The blue wall of silence, the toxic code he had relied on for 10 years to protect his worst impulses, had just shattered into a million pieces. "Thank you, Officer Harrison," the chief said, his tone softening a fraction. "Your honesty is noted. Wait in the briefing room. Internal Affairs will need your official statement." As Harrison walked away, James picked up Perry's heavy gold badge from the desk where Miller had set it. He weighed it in his palm, feeling the cold metal, then slid it into his coat pocket beside his own. "Go sit in the interrogation room, Mr. Perry," James said, deliberately dropping the title of officer. "Your night is just beginning." By 4:15 a.m., the 4th Precinct had gone from a sleepy graveyard shift to a high-octane command center. Captain Richard Donovan, head of Internal Affairs, a notoriously ruthless investigator who had built his career hunting corrupt cops, arrived with 3 of his best detectives. They moved with clinical efficiency, taking over the commander's office and turning it into a war room. Donovan, lean, prematurely silver-haired, with sharp analytical eyes, plugged the confiscated body cameras into his encrypted laptop. Chief James sat in the corner, arms crossed, watching the monitors. Maya sat beside him, wrapped in a dry police blanket someone had found, sipping a cup of hot tea. "All right, let's see what we have," Donovan muttered and hit play on Perry's footage. The video filled the screen in high definition, the sound of freezing rain instantly audible. It showed Perry's aggressive approach. The flashlight shoved into Maya's face the hostile tone from the first word. Maya watched herself, heard her own calm, measured voice, heard Perry's rising agitation, the fabricated claim about the yellow line, and the unmistakable slap of his hand against his holster. "He's trying to provoke a 148, Donovan noted, referencing the code for resisting an officer. "Textbook escalation. He wants her to snap so he has a legitimate reason to put hands on her." The video showed Maya stepping out. Then the footage jerked as Perry grabbed her, and the audio caught the sickening thud of her chest hitting the wet roof. Dimitar James's jaw clenched so hard the muscle looked like it might snap. He watched a man assault his daughter under the color of authority, and it took every ounce of 30 years of discipline not to walk down the hall and handle it the old-fashioned way. "Stop the video," James ordered quietly. Donovan hit the spacebar. The image froze on Maya's face against the roof, an expression of pained endurance. "We have excessive force, false arrest, and a clear 4th Amendment violation," Donovan said, typing. "But Perry's a rat. He'll claim he smelled marijuana or perceived a furtive movement. He'll try to muddy the water. His union rep, Thomas O'Grady, is in the lobby right now, and O'Grady is a bulldog." James shook his head. "Perry is arrogant, Richard. Arrogant men get sloppy when they panic. When I walked in, he was sitting at the break table. I want the precinct security footage from 3:10 to 3:30. I want to know exactly what he was doing before I came through those doors." Donovan nodded to a detective who pulled up the booking room CCTV. They fast-forwarded to Perry bringing Maya in, watched the booking, then watched Perry retreat to the break area with his two buddies. "Zoom in on Perry," James said. The detective enhanced the feed. Perry was laughing, eating his donut. Then, for a window of about 45 seconds, he pulled his personal cell phone from his pocket, hunched over, shielded the screen with his hand, and typed a rapid message before slipping the phone away. He sent a text. Donovan observed, eyes narrowing. Who's he texting at 3:20 in the morning, right after a contested arrest? James's mind raced. He knows Harrison's a liability. He knows the arrest report is thin. If he's cunning, and he knows the one thing that can undeniably sink him is the dash cam footage from Unit 42. The body cam he can try to explain away as a scuffle. But the dash cam shows the driving. It proves the initial stop was pure fabrication. "I was texting dispatch," Donovan said, the pieces clicking together. "The cruiser servers are housed at the downtown hub. He's got a buddy in dispatch who owes him. He was trying to get the footage corrupted or wiped." Donovan grabbed his radio. "IA Team 2, this is Donovan. I need a seizure warrant for Bernard Perry's personal cell phone right now and get a team to the central dispatch server room. Lock down all data for Unit 42. 10 minutes later, a detective walked in holding a sealed evidence bag with Perry's phone inside. "He tried to smash it when we came into the room, Captain, but we got it before he cracked the board. It's pulling logs now." At 5:15, Thomas O'Grady, the formidable rep for the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, pushed his way into the office. He was a big, red-faced man who made a living defending the indefensible. "Chief James, Captain Donovan." O'Grady leaned heavily on the desk. "This is a gross violation of due process. You stripped a decorated veteran of his badge on hearsay from a rookie, and you locked him in a box. I want my client reinstated and released, or I'll have the mayor's office bearing you in injunctions by 9. James didn't stand. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Read it, Tom." O'Grady scowled and picked it up. It was a printed transcript of a text extracted from Perry's phone, sent at 3:21 a.m., to a dispatcher named Kevin Lewis. "Kev, need a huge favor. Unit 42 dash cam from 0200 to 0230. A glitch happened, right corrupted file. I owe you big. Delete it before morning shift." O'Grady's red face drained to a sickly gray. The bluster went out of his posture. A bad arrest could be defended in arbitration. Excessive force could be argued before a sympathetic civil service board. But conspiracy to destroy digital evidence, soliciting another city employee to commit a felony cover-up that was federal. That was the end of the line. "Furthermore," Donovan added, leaning back, "Officer Harrison has just signed a sworn affidavit stating Perry fabricated the probable cause for the stop specifically to harass a civilian. We have body cam footage of an unprovoked physical assault. And as you may have noticed, the victim in this case is the daughter of the chief of police." O'Grady set the paper back down. He looked at Demeter James, then at Maya, who watched him with cool, calculating eyes. O'Grady was a fighter, but he wasn't a fool. He knew a bloodbath when he saw one. Perry hadn't just stepped on a landmine. He'd jumped on a grenade and pulled the pin himself. "I see," O'Grady said, clearing his throat, taking a step back from the desk, physically distancing himself from his client's sinking ship. "The PBA cannot and will not condone the destruction of evidence. Officer Perry is on his own regarding the tampering charges." "Glad we agree, Tom." James finally stood and buttoned his coat. By 8 a.m., "I want Perry's resignation on my desk. If he resigns, I'll let the district attorney handle the criminal charges for the assault and the tampering. If he refuses, I'll fire him publicly at a 9 a.m. press conference, release the body cam footage to every outlet in the state, and personally lobby the U.S. attorney to charge him with federal civil rights violations." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "He will never wear a badge again. Not in this city, not in this state, not anywhere. Go tell your client what time it is." O'Grady nodded quickly and fled the room. The Union machinery had officially abandoned Bernard Perry. The predator had become the prey, dismantled with ruthless bureaucratic precision before the sun had even risen. The interrogation room deep inside the precinct was a chamber built to break the human spirit, dull institutional gray walls, air conditioning cranked to a freezing 60 degrees. For 2 hours, Bernard Perry had been left alone in it. He had paced, cursed, kicked the metal table leg, and finally collapsed into the rigid chair, staring at the one-way mirror. He knew exactly how this game was played. He had run these same tactics on hundreds of suspects. The isolation was meant to let the panic steep like bitter tea. At 5:45, the steel door unlocked with a mechanical clank. Chief Dimitar James walked in first, Captain Donovan behind him. Neither man carried a notepad, neither offered water or a cigarette. They didn't sit. They stood on the opposite side of the table and looked down at the man who had terrorized the South Side for a decade. "Where's O'Grady?" Perry demanded, voice raspy, trying to project a defiance he no longer felt. "I know my rights. I don't say a word until my PBA rep is in that chair." "Tom O'Grady went home to his wife Bernard," Donovan said without a flicker of emotion. "He took one look at the evidence and decided the union doesn't cover federal obstruction and evidence tampering. You're flying solo tonight," Perry scoffed, though his eyes darted to the door. "Bluffing. The PBA doesn't abandon a senior officer over a scuffle with a combative suspect. You've got a rookie's word against a decorated veteran. Good luck selling that to a grand jury." Chief James reached into his coat. He didn't pull out the confiscated badge. He pulled out a single sheet of printed text transcript and slid it across the cold metal table until it stopped directly under Perry's nose. "Kevin Lewis in dispatch sends his regards," James said quietly. "We intercepted the deletion request. The server is locked. The dash cam footage of my daughter driving perfectly for 4 blocks is secured in an encrypted internal affairs vault. The body cam footage of you assaulting her is secured. And now, we have your written attempt to solicit a city employee to destroy evidence of a civil rights violation." Perry stared at the paper. The words blurred together. Blood roared in his ears. The text was the kill shot. There was no spinning it, no feared for my life defense. It was premeditated, documented corruption. He looked up. The chief's face was carved granite, showing zero mercy. 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Donovan said, checking his watch as if the matter were already settled. "That's the mandatory minimum we'll seek when we hand this to the FBI Public Corruption Squad at 9 this morning. A cop like you, Bernard, you won't last 2 years in general population." Perry's breath came in short, hyperventilating gasps. The bravado shattered completely, leaving a terrified man clinging to the edge of a cliff, his mind racing for any leverage, any piece of collateral to bargain with. "Wait," he croaked, pressing his trembling hands flat to the table. "Wait, you want to talk about corruption? You think I'm the only one? You think Kevin Lewis wiped server files out of the goodness of his heart?" James and Donovan exchanged a micro-glance. This was the crack in the dam they'd been waiting for. "Keep talking," James commanded. Perry leaned forward, eyes wide and bloodshot sweat dripping from his brow. "If I go down for this, I'm not going down alone. You want to clean up the 4th Precinct, Chief? You think I'm the problem? I'm just a collector, a foot soldier." "A collector for what?" Donovan asked, stepping closer. "The South Side Initiative." Perry sneered, spitting the words like poison. "That's what they call it. You think the petty citations, the civil asset, forfeitures, the cash seized off suspected dealers that never makes it to the evidence locker. You think that just disappears. It goes into a slush fund. Lewis gets a cut to wipe the digital trails. The patrolmen get a cut for making the stops. And the lion's share goes straight to the top of this precinct." James felt a cold spike of adrenaline. He had suspected deep-rooted problems in the 4th, but a coordinated systemic extortion ring was beyond his worst fears. "Give me a name, Perry, right now." "Captain Robert Mitchell." Perry dropped the name of the precinct's commanding officer. "Mitchell runs the whole show. He targets undocumented immigrants, out-of-towners, anyone without the money to fight a bogus charge in court. I targeted your daughter tonight because she was young, black, and driving a beat-up Honda in the South Side at 2 a.m. She fit the profile of a perfect victim, someone we could shake down, intimidate, and process without making waves. I didn't know who she was, but Mitchell, he designed the whole system." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Perry had just offered up a king to save a pawn. "Where's the proof?" Donovan demanded, already 3 steps ahead. "The word of a disgraced cop facing 20 years isn't enough to take down a precinct." Perry gave a grim, ugly smile. "Mitchell's old school, but he's greedy. He doesn't trust digital ledgers. He keeps a physical burn book, a little black notebook, in the false bottom of the lowest drawer of his office desk. Every payout, every wiped file, every fake arrest for the last 4 years. You want the head of the snake chief? It's sitting in the commander's office right now." James didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and walked out, Donovan behind him, leaving Perry alone with his treacherous confession. They walked briskly to the war room where Maya still sat, watching the rain finally taper off through the barred windows. "Did you get him?" she asked, seeing the dark intensity in her father's eyes. "We got a lot more than him." He looked at Donovan. "Get a search warrant for Captain Mitchell's office desk immediately. Wake Judge Harper. Tell her it's a matter of departmental integrity. I want that desk torn apart before Mitchell arrives for his morning shift at 7. Donovan nodded, already pulling out his phone. "And Perry just bought himself out of federal lockup, but he's still going to state prison," James said coldly. "Prepare the resignation paperwork, but I want Mitchell in handcuffs before the sun clears the horizon." At 6:30, the first light broke through the heavy cloud cover, casting a pale, bruised glow over Fairview. Inside the precinct, the night shift officers were kept on lockdown, unable to leave, while armed internal affairs detectives stood at the doors. In Captain Robert Mitchell's office, Donovan's team meticulously dismantled the heavy oak desk, armed with the emergency warrant. A furious municipal judge had signed 20 minutes earlier. They pulled out the bottom drawer, and Donovan took a crowbar to the base. With a sharp crack, the false bottom splintered, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside sat a small black notebook, exactly as Perry had described. Donovan flipped through it. It was a masterpiece of arrogance: dates, badge numbers, amounts of seized cash, payouts to dispatchers, all meticulously logged. It was an airtight map of a criminal enterprise operating under the banner of the Fairview Police Department. "Checkmate," Donovan whispered. At 6:55, the front doors swung open. Captain Robert Mitchell, a boisterous silver-haired man who had treated the South Side like his personal fiefdom for 5 years, strolled into the lobby holding a large coffee, completely oblivious to what had happened in his house overnight. "Morning, Sergeant," Mitchell boomed toward the booking desk, expecting the usual chorus of respectful greetings. Instead, he found Chief Demeter James standing in the center of the room. Behind him stood Donovan, holding the black notebook sealed in a plastic evidence bag. To Mitchell's right, 4 internal affairs detectives stepped out of the shadows, hands resting on their weapons. Mitchell froze, his eyes locked on the notebook. The coffee slipped from his fingers and hit the floor, splashing across his polished shoes. "Captain Robert Mitchell," Donovan announced, his voice ringing with authority, "you're under arrest for racketeering, extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and corruption of public officials. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Mitchell didn't fight. He didn't argue. He knew the notebook was a death sentence. The color drained from his face as the detectives moved in and ratcheted the cuffs around the wrists of the precinct commander. As he was marched out of his own lobby, the remaining night shift officers watched in stunned, terrified silence. Some of them had taken the cuts. Some had only looked away. All of them understood in that moment that the arrangement they'd believed was permanent had been permanent only because no one above them had cared to look. The untouchable regime of the 4th Precinct had been decapitated in a matter of minutes. Chief James watched the doors swing shut behind Mitchell, then turned to the room full of frightened officers. "Every stop, every seizure, every citation logged in that book will be reviewed," he said quietly. "If your name is in it, you have until noon to walk into internal affairs on your own. After noon, we come and find you." Nobody moved, and nobody doubted him. Back in the interrogation room, Donovan set a single sheet of paper and a cheap plastic pen in front of Bernard Perry. "This is your resignation from the Fairview Police Department, effective immediately. Sign it, and I'll recommend the DA drop the federal civil rights charges in exchange for your testimony against Mitchell. You'll plead guilty to state-level evidence tampering and assault. You're still doing time, Bernard, but you do it in a state facility instead of a federal pen." Perry picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely form the letters. He scrawled his signature across the bottom line, officially ending his 10-year career of bullying, intimidation, and corruption. "Stand up," James ordered from the doorway. Perry stood shoulders slumped, a hollow, defeated shell of the man who had pulled Maya over just hours earlier. "Turn in your ID card, your precinct keys, and your PBA card." Perry numbly emptied his pockets onto the table. "You're a disgrace to that uniform," James said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You used the authority vested in you to terrorize the very people you swore to protect. You thought the badge made you a god in the dark. But the light always comes, Perry. And in the light, you're nothing." James turned and walked out, leaving Perry to the custody of the internal affairs detectives. At 7:30 a.m., the precinct doors opened one final time, and Maya James walked out into the crisp, cold morning air. The rain had stopped washing the streets clean. The gray clouds were breaking apart, letting bright golden shafts of sunlight strike the pavement. Dimitar walked beside her. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the night finally receding, leaving the heavy weight of leadership behind. But as he looked at his daughter, his posture straightened. "Are you all right, Maya?" he asked, opening the passenger door of the expedition for her. She paused, looking back at the brutal concrete architecture of the 4th Precinct. She thought about the terror on that dark highway, the cuffs biting into her wrists. And then she thought about the black notebook, about Mitchell in handcuffs, about Perry signing away his power. "I am," she said softly, a fierce, resilient spark in her eyes. "He thought I was just a victim, Dad. He thought I was just another number he could push around in the dark. He didn't realize he pulled over the one person who could tear his whole world down." Dimitar smiled, a rare, genuine expression of immense pride. "No, sweetheart, he didn't." He paused, his hand on the door. "You know the thing I'm proudest of tonight, not the notebook, not Mitchell. It's that when that man had his knee in your back, you kept your head clear enough to memorize his badge number. Most trained officers panic. You gave me a case." He shook his head slowly. "You're going to be a hell of a lawyer, Maya." They climbed into the SUV. As Dimitar started the engine, he reached into his coat and pulled out the heavy gold badge stamped with the number 4492. He looked at it a long moment, a badge that had been used as a shield for a monster, a badge that no longer held any power. Then he dropped it into the center console, shifted into drive, and pulled out of the lot, heading north toward home. Behind them, the Fairview Police Department was irrevocably changed, purged of its darkest rot. By that afternoon, the story would be on every local channel, and by the weekend, the U.S. Attorney's Office would announce a formal review of every arrest logged in Mitchell's Black Book. Dozens of people who had been shaken down in the dark would finally have their cases reopened in the light. All because one arrogant cop picked the wrong woman on a rainy night. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, do 2 quick things before you go. Subscribe so you're here when the next one drops, and leave a comment. What would you have done in Maya's seat on that dark highway? I read every single one.